Hello. Hi. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Hi, Evan. Hi, Salva. Hi, Asha. Hello, Brittany. Oh, this is great. Everyone's just like talking about where they're from. This is great. So excited to be here. Okay. Hello. All right. So, welcome. I am Jessica. I'm the CEO and co-founder of playbook.com. It's a visual cloud storage startup in San Francisco. We are Dropbox meets Pinterest. So putting all your creative files into cloud storage, making it fun, and making it very visual for designers. So you haven't tried it, I highly recommend, or I'd love for you to check it out. So hello, San Francisco. Yes, I'm in San Francisco as well. I'm in Bernal. Oh, thank you. So yeah, this session is going to be all about getting into design leadership, mostly about my personal journey, becoming an IC, all the way to becoming the design leadership, design manager, head of design, and also now I'm the CEO of my own startup. But I know, everyone zigzags. There was a time that I was head of design and then moved to another startup, become IC again, and then also become a design manager again. So everyone zigzags in this industry. So love to tell you about that personal journey, what lessons I've learned, what mistakes I've done, all of that stuff. But before I start, love to see if anyone have Q&As, questions. In the Q&A, if you can just type in your questions. I would love this session to be very interactive. Let's just have a very casual chat with, I don't know, it sounds like there's probably, good number of you. Let's just relax and, let's just ask me anything about anything. You can talk about celery, any sensitive materials too. I'm all about transparency. Oh, yeah. Well, my company's name is playbook.com. So I'll write that in here. Right, that's my company. Okay. So let's start. You know what? I will start with the first three most asked questions, and then let's warm it up, and then I'll get to your questions after. How about that? So usually the first question I get is, what your design journey like? So really, it's just kind of giving you a little bit of my background as well. I started my career as more of a UI engineer. You know how design industry tends to come from a lot of engineering. It's like right next to it. And then there's a lot of brand designer tends to go into product design as well. That's more on the visual side. So I come from more technical side, getting into UX. When I started at Google, this was back in 2007. It was design team was pretty fairly small, and then it was like probably about 100 people. Now it's tens of thousands of designers, but back then it was one team that had a visual designer, UX designer, and I sort of joined that team as their first prototyper. So back then I was coding a lot. I was making prototypes for designers, and then before handing it off to engineers. So it was very much like this kind of almost waterfall kind of process, and I've sort of my job role and fit in that tiny sort of niche area between UX and engineering. Now it's like everyone does everything these days, but back then it was very much like there's a bit like a sliver of role there. And then I worked on Google Drive. I worked on the first version of Google Drive, and then Google Apps Enterprise, and then finally YouTube. And then this was 2014. I jumped to a startup called Opendoor, which was 7 people startup. Now it's IPO'd. It's much bigger company now, but back then it was tiny company. And then I joined as the first designer, so founding designer, and then quickly became sort of design manager. And then as the company grew so fast, I became the head of design. I recruited all of my designers. Of course, hired, fired, all of that design management stuff, and learned a lot, learned a ton. So that's the question, and that was the answer to my design journey. And the second question that I get the most is, what was it like going from an IC designer, so individual contributor designer, to a manager and to a head of design? All of that, it came very naturally. I think it was because I was naturally a founding designer. You usually, when you're experienced enough, then it tends to, you hire people. You are the ones who go out and hire, and you tend to kind of start the team. So it sort of came natural for me. So it started out as I hire another product designer from Facebook, and then 2 brand designers, and then hire 5 product designers right after. So it almost like kind of grew much more naturally, rather than me going out and then finding a job as design manager. Um, Up until about 6 people, my job didn't change very much. It still felt like a startup. 6 people, feel like there's not a whole lot of communication, um, fallout. But once you reach a certain level on your team size, the communications start to fall apart. And then the organization becomes much more complex. Before, I only had to deal with 2 marketing managers. And all of a sudden, now I have to deal with 12 marketing managers and their requests every day. And then before, I only had to deal with maybe 1 product manager. And then at one point, I was dealing with 6 other product managers. And then the product became much more complex. So it start to kind of form each like a team. And then that all of those requests, and then their requests and all of the feedback came directly to me into, whenever they had to deal with design. So that's usually how it starts with a startup, is like it tends to start very small, a product that only 6 or 10 people can manage. And then as the product gets much more complicated, then you start adding more designers, because people can't context switch as much, because you can't work on 5 different products at once, because every day will be very different. So you start hiring people to kind of oversee some of those different domain areas, and then now you have to deal with different teams, and then now you have to deal with their hierarchy as well, because then there is going to be a GM to that team, a general manager, and there will be a ton of operations on one aspect of the business, and then you have to deal with the design aspect of that. So that's what happened. So being a manager, again, that small team, it didn't change very much, but once you reach a certain level, as in like the communications start to kind of fall apart, and then the organization complexity happened, that's when really I have to wear this, like, what is this role that am I playing? I can't do what I used to do anymore. And that's when I had almost like a mental breakdown at some point. It was like, what is my role? What am I doing? That's the kind of stuff. So that's the whole reason of why I wanted to talk to you about today in this session, is all of that lessons, and the things that I wish I had known if I were to do it again. And that leads to the third question, is like, what would I have done differently? What would I have done differently? The biggest mistake that I made, usually and this happens, what I was told this happens to a lot of people when they become the first manager, is when you start mother henning your team. That is one mistake. Is because we hear about, oh, that bad manager, I would never become that person. Or you hear about LinkedIn posts all about shitting on management, managers basically. So I would never be that. So so that's when you become the manager, and then you wish you were the best manager in the world. And you really think you could be that best manager in the world, because you learned from the other side, being that IC, reporting to that horrible manager, any one of horrible managers you had in the past, you think you could do better than them. So you go in there, and then of course, anytime somebody has any problems, you want to go and try to solve it, fix it for them. You want to coach people the right way. You do everything you could do, even if they have problems outside of work. They're going through some kind of personal hardships and things like that. You're really in it emotionally, like you want to help this person, you want to do the best you can do. eventually over time, you realize what you're doing is a very much like taking on a lot of emotional burden from people, and it start to kind of fall apart. And not only that, once you start mother henning people, you kind of sort of neglect your other department heads. So the people that want your department to want help from your department, so want help from design organizations. So before, I only had to worry about my boss. I only had to worry based, when you're IC, you only have to worry about what your boss says, maybe some peers like product managers or product marketers. And then you become sort of the manager. You have four sides all of a sudden. You have boss, you have people under you, and then you have department heads, so your peers. And then the peers, and then they're underneath their people as well. So it becomes almost it is what it used to be very simple is has to be you have to make everyone happy all around, top side to the bottom. And most of the time, first managers tend to focus too much on the sort of the mother henning, again, your team. Whatever you need, I will protect you. And that's always that kind of, because you wish, as an IC, you wish your manager did that for you. Protect me. So that's what you do first time. And then you realize when you do that, all three sides start to get really unhappy with you because all you're doing protecting. This is why everyone says once you become sort of middle manager or executive, you become politician, is because you're trying to get everyone happy. And that is technically your job. But tactically, your job becomes only two goals. Head of design or the design manager, design leadership, there are only two goals. You're always increasing the quality bar, usually is design. So you're always making your product quality better, product UX bar better, whatever you need. Do you need to hire researchers to make that bar higher? Then do it. We have full sort of like decision making, like headcount wise. We know we need to make those headcount decisions based on this two goals. First being that the quality bar, increase the quality bar. And the second thing is operationalize what's working. There's two things. So usually the second thing is consistently do it over and over again. So something's working. You built up new features and then you got that process down the first time. How do we operationalize it so because everyone knows exactly what to do when they come to work? Or there's some sort of process. So you start implementing some level of design process to make sure that you're operationalizing so that everyone knows what to do exactly. And everyone feels comfortable with the process. And then again, so the first one is quality, and the second thing is operationalizing. And that is the job of design leadership. And most people, when we go into it, we don't know it. We think that our job is to make sure our team is happy, we hire people, we help with the recruiting. The tactically we know, but we don't realize a high level, these are the two things that we have to do. And they're usually, most of the time, they're fighting with each other. The quality bar and the consistency is always like, because you're trying to up the quality, increase the quality, which means that you have to hire better people or better designers or do other things. System process usually doesn't actually increase a quality bar. You have to push it very, very, very hard to make sure that your quality bar goes high. It's just like any time when you're doing a startup, your first service is always going to be white glove. It's going to be great. Your user is going to be happy because you only have to deal with maybe 100 users. And then once you start dealing with 10,000 users, once you're dealing with 100,000 users, then everything fall apart. This is the reason why airlines have terrible customer service, or any big companies tend to customer service tend to fall apart because they are starting to operationalize it to make sure nothing falls through. It's always to protect the worst case scenario, not necessarily you're trying to move up the quality bar of customer service. That is true for design as well. So the second part is always the worst case scenario. Make sure that that doesn't happen. And then, of course, the first part is make sure that the bar is always higher. So this is a kind of like, as the design leaders, you're trying to move this upwards, like a more slowly. And that's the job of design leadership. And most of the time, when you hear from LinkedIn posts or all these design leadership talking or design manager talking, they're really just talking about usually one aspect of the job, not necessarily the actual high level goal of this role. So, and of course, that's the biggest lesson I took. And then this is also something I actually didn't realize up until now, which is now I'm the CEO. And then this is what I want the design leadership to do. This is what I want the executive team to do. And then it's not necessarily my CEO actually communicate this to me when I was the head of design, Opendoor, but now I'm looking back, it's like, oh, I wish I knew this because then my job would have been a lot more simpler. I would have been much more focused instead of trying to do everything all at once and trying to be that person who's like going out and then putting out fires and fix everything and then putting down the process. Oh, the process doesn't work. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. And then if I knew all of what my high level goal was, I would have communicated this to my team better as well because I feel like I have no vision, and that was probably one of the biggest sort of lesson I took from that period of time. So with that, let's go to your Q&As. Hopefully that sort of give you some backgrounds of what this is going to be all about. All right. Okay, so let's go with from top to bottom. Most voted. Would you recommend an entry-level designer to join a startup for a more established company? Would I recommend an entry level to join a startup or more established company? That's a great question. That's actually a lot of people ask me that question. My answer is depends. Whatever you can get, but if you had a choice, it is always good to see what good to learn craft. Just because we're a very crafty job, out of all jobs in tech world, I think design is probably the most crafty job. Engineering is another one. This is why when we refer to designers and engineers, we call them resources. Marketing managers want resources. Product managers want resources. The leadership wants resources. We call engineers and designers resources. It's because we are the ones who kind of solve problems. We go out and actually create solutions. So, and that requires a lot of craft. That usually requires 10,000 hours to make your craft better. That requires a lot of just doing. We're one of the very few jobs, just by doing a lot, we actually get better and better and better. Our skills are half hard skills and then half soft skills. Hard skills mean you either code or you actually putting artifacts out. It's not just like document editing. It's like actually showing the world what the solution. That is what I call artifacts. So hard skills, we are one of the very few jobs that have hard skills as well as soft skills. So that's why the hard skills actually is what I call craft. It requires a lot of practicing. It also requires a lot of seeing. This is why communities like Dribble is great because you get to see a lot of people's work all at once. But if you join a large established team, they tend to have like 30 to 50 designers, and you get to see what their skills are. So you're almost like learning by seeing. So you're looking over people's shoulders, like that's a great design. Oh, okay. You're constantly exposing yourself to a lot of people's skills because every designer is very different. So you're learning quite a bit just by seeing and being part of a large team. You are a small piece in a large system in a way that a lot of people don't like it, but that's the only way to see what it's like to build a system because you're seeing the system from inside. Because eventually when you start becoming that design leader where you have to build the system yourself, at least you can actually, that time I joined Shopify, or that time I joined, big company like Netflix, and then this is the system they built. Okay, now I know what to do. That's usually the reason why you want to join a established company. But I wouldn't stay there for more than a few years because you only need so many years to learn what the system looks like. And then afterwards, it's like, okay, I get the point. Sometimes every design team has a different system. So Shopify is very different than Netflix. Google is very different than Facebook. So sometimes joining a different company just to see what a different systems look like can be very, very helpful too. And sometimes joining a startup, one to another, they're also very, very different because the people who are in it have different skill sets. So you are going as a head of design in a different way. So it actually makes you almost like flexible too. You have a lot of experience under your belt. You can kind of like pull it out whenever you need it. Whatever that that system you have seen before, you have experienced before, you're pulling it out every time you're joining a different startups. That's the advantage you have by joining an early, more established company, learning craft, and then seeing the whole system. Now, there's also advantage of joining a startup early, is that you learn so fast. You learn marketing and sales before you learn design. You learn business before you learn design. So it's almost like you become all around designer at such an early age. So I would say you pick whichever you like. There are people who are a little more entrepreneur, likes to go in a startup even right after out of college, and the people who are I like to tend to be focused more on identity first. It's like I want to be a good designer. Then you tend to join a very established team. So those are two different paths that you could take. Okay, hopefully that answered your question. Let me see if I can. All right. The next question is, if you would go back to your first startup leadership, earliest startup leadership role, what would you have done differently knowing what you know now? Yeah, what would I differently knowing than what I know now? That actually happened. So I left Opendoor to join another startup, and then immediately felt much more. I knew exactly what to expect, and that's power of experience, right? You go to first startup, you go through the hell of the first journey. Um, you're completely blind. You've never experienced before. It's almost like taking steps as a toddler again. Like it's like wow, and this is like I've never done this. But what is brand? What is marketing? What is sales? And so you learn a ton, and then you join a second startup. You know exactly what to do almost because you've seen it. Um, so in that way, the startup experience is almost like repetitive. You could join one startup and you learn a ton, and then you join a second startup. You almost know what to expect. And this is what happens when you reach 40 people. This is what happens when you reach 100 people. So you're almost like over prepared, over correcting your mistakes of your first one. Before, I would not invest at all in design system. But now I join a startup as a design leadership. I would be like, okay, I would start investing in design system when this happens. So you tend to kind of like, okay, it's just I'm gonna have to hire five teammates. That means I have to start investing design systems now. So that's the kind of give me some idea of like what to expect, how to prepare. So that's why I think that some lessons they're tactical like this, and there are some lessons that mentally I was like, okay, I'm not so blind. I don't feel so lost. I know exactly what to do. These are two goals. I'm always going to keep making sure the quality bar is high. I'm always going to make sure that there's a way to operationalize this, which means that I'm going to have hire good people managers under me so that they can help me operationalize some of these process. So that's the kind of stuff that I would do much better. One other mistake now that I mistake lesson, is something that just occurred to me is that as an IC, you always think that if you're a good manager, you could always coach somebody. You could always bring that person to the next level, next level, next level. And there's something that I have learned is that not all designers are meant to be managers. And there's some hard lessons that I learned is no matter what I do, just naturally their personality wise, they're not meant to be a manager. They're just meant to be a designer. And that's okay. It's not like everyone needs to move up the job ladder and then it's my responsibility to make sure that they're moving up. That's not always the case, and it never works out that way. There are people just naturally extremely talented with management. They just have born with a high EQ. They grew up with a big family or something. They somehow knows how to like read the room and make sure that change the room temperature and things like that. They just know these things. And then if you just plug in the right lieutenants, then everything just works. It just works perfectly. Whereas if you have the wrong person in the role, everything just feels like it's a struggle. Every day is a struggle. You feel like you have to do more work. You feel like you have to constantly fix like, that part of that department. And that is something that I learned the hard way. It's that there are people who are actually pretty good at this, and then make sure that you are putting the right people in the right places, because that will make your job so much easier that you don't have to do all this, by yourself. So that is the one lesson also I took, is that I would rather actually find people who are a good match to that role, rather than me trying so hard to make sure that, like just groom everyone to be that role. It's not always the case. So, all right. And the next question is, would you recommend an entry level designer? Oh, that's the question I actually answered. Okay, the next question is, since you've been it all, what would you look what what would you look or in a designer who might be a potentially employee for your company? And would you please give us some pointers on how to reach that standard? Ooh, that's a great question too. Potential employee for my company. I think you mean like startup. I would, if I was a head of design at Google, I would approach recruiting very differently than as a CEO myself, trying to hire second or third designer in our company. Because you're talking about 10% of the company or 20% of the company, sometimes 5% of the company. Every personality matters so much in a startup, and it changes so like culture and then the team dynamic, that I would completely do it very differently than Google, for example. Google is very much like system is built. So anytime I throw more new people at it, they would find themselves in that system. So it almost just like it runs on its own. Whereas, startup is still building that system. So if I put a wrong person on it, the system it would just stops, as in it will not run. So I would give you two different answers to these questions. If I'm the CEO and hiring designers in my startup, then personality matters quite a bit. Their attitude matters quite a bit. And then the third thing is they're very problem focused, less of identity focus. What I mean by identity focus is that I want to be a better designer. Well, that is usually not the right startup attitude. Startup is all about, you have to wear different hats constantly. You have to be a PM sometimes, you have to be a marketer sometimes. So that means you are extremely focused on the problem in hand. So you're focused on problems, like I'm going to do what it takes to get this thing done, solved. So that's the kind of person you want to start up, because that's how you keep pushing the boat or the car or the truck, whatever that is. You keep pushing it. Whereas Google, it runs on its own. The system is built. There's a product market fit. There's a whole lot of people. The organization is basically a machine in itself, and then that means that most of the time, the design leadership, when they're looking for people, is usually focusing on the quality part of it a little more, because when the consistency is there and everything is operationalized, you're usually like I said, there's two goals, right? The quality bar tends to be the one that you have to push the most, because the inertia is that it wants to keep everything the same as it is, like that sort of systemizing everything or operationalizing everything generally is, it just run it as if it's like just everything is going to be today. But if you want to be, of course Google wants to be better, of course the Facebook wants to be better. What do you think that they keep rebranding and redoing everything, their product UI and everything? They just want to keep pushing the quality bar, which means that their job is make sure the quality bar just keeps going up, 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 up. So that, and at the same time, of course, also the big company's job is usually they want to explore more um, domain. So they want to keep investing in different kind of product, so that you're at the same time trying to maintain that kind of, like the resource planning. So make sure that every PM gets like design resources and things like that. So you become almost resource planning person, at the same time quality bar. So that's sort of how the Google design leadership is looking for people. So it's less about personality, attitude, culture, more about quality. Startup is everything about problem focused attitude, and hustleness. It's just the personality, because the culture actually is quite important in a small startup. All right. So next question is, all right, we have 9 minutes. I'll go pretty fast. How do we manage the expectation and requirements from marketing while balancing user experience and new design? Ooh, that's a great question. Also, that's really hard. Expectation and requirements from marketing. I would say, I don't know if you ever, I don't know if most of you are product designers, but marketing brand design is probably the hardest team I've ever dealt with. And it's still the case as a CEO as well. They're very much like, let's do this, like launch, 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 launch. So it's like every day we're launching something. It's like, it's very different pace and speed than product design, where speed, um, if I were to compare marketing design and product design, is marketing design is very much like fast cooking. Come on, like let's just launch this. Whereas product design is much more slow cooking. So it's like, let's make sure that we're approaching this a little more slowly. Research, there's some kind of slowness to it. I think as engineering, generally, it just takes a really long time to build stuff. Whereas marketing tends to be much more dopamine, much more like there's a lot of things that you can do without just launching on social media and things like that. So it's much more fast paced. So that's why managing marketing is the hardest thing. And then they tend to also be that most of the time marketing people don't understand this kind of user experience side of things, building the product side of things, how slow things should move, how slow things sometimes move. So this is why there's a lot of clash between the way that they work, and then the way that the way the product works, and the user experience being part of the product. So that's why this is not an easy thing to do. If you ever get stuck in between this marketing and user experience, it's all really about communications, and managing, again, expectations, of course, through communications. You have to be very clear how long it takes to get their needs delivered. At the same time, you want to make sure that you are meeting some level of quality bar, but you do have to let go of some level quality as well, because you can't always win in this battle. So you have to give some to win some. So you have to give in for sometimes for like that speediness and then fast turnaround. But at some time, you have to go back to them and say, okay, I will deliver those things, but can we actually go back and fix some of these things later? Is that okay? So you're constantly managing those conflicts. Give some, lose some, win some. Make sure that everyone wins at the end. That's the goal of these relationships. Okay. Next question is, in your opinion, do you get to grow faster as a designer at a startup than a large organization because you get to wear multiple hats and have a seat at the table when it comes to strategic decisions? Grow faster as a designer, it depends on what kind of designers you want to be. I think if you go down to this very craftsmanship, there's a lot of designers I admire immensely at Google, but they go very deep into their industry. So design industry, they want to make sure they're doing, they're perfecting their skills as a designer. I tend to be the kind of person who have more of a breadth. I get very curious about other fields. I get very curious about marketing. I get very curious about sales. What is this like fundraising processing? What is all the stuff that people are talking about startup world? I get very curious. So when I follow my curiosity, I ended up in more of a startup world where I get to see everything and do everything. But if I had a curiosity into much more deep, like depth level, then I would have probably stayed in one product and then just make sure that I'm honing my skills constantly. So it really depends on who you are. I think the answer to this is follow your curiosity. If you are curious about the rest of the business and then how everything works, because once you start to understand how business works, then you understand what a seat at the table really means. Because seat at the table is not just being like physically, literally being seat at the table, but it's more you understanding what other parts of the departments do and what their needs are, and you can actually communicate them, just like what I said previously, like negotiate with them because you know what they need and you know what your leverage is, you know what to do, all of that stuff. So that's why if you want to be sit at the table, I think it's good to go to startup and learn the rest of the the company how it works. All right, so 5 minutes. I just got a 4 minute warning. Okay, so let's see how many can I do this. If you have any, by the way, if you really want your question answered, if you just like LinkedIn message me, I'm happy to answer this. Maybe not right away, but anytime, probably next week, I'll try to find a way to answer your questions. Or you can email me at jessica@playbook.com too. Yeah, jessica@playbook.com. I will type that in there. So if I didn't get to answer your questions, I really wish I had more time. This has been so fun. So anytime after this, you can email me as well. I'll try my best to reply. All right, so given that 3 minutes, all right, I'll do one more questions and then I'll say goodbye to you all and wish you luck with everything. Let's see what's okay. The next question was Jasmine. Would love it if you could go into your experience relating to salary and your beginning and how now I have time. Okay, that's a great question. Okay, ending with the salary. What a fantastic way to end a session. I joined Google and my salary at the time was, this was 2007, by the way. And then I was 26 years old, I think. My salary was in Silicon Valley very low. I was making 65,000 a year, which was very low at the time. Well, actually, right now, today's term. But at the time, I was completely, totally fine. My rent was $1,000 a month. I was managing it just fine. And then over time, these days, I think senior managers in Silicon Valley tends to make over anywhere between like 160,000 to all the way to I've seen as much as 250,000 a year. And this is a base salary. I'm not talking about equity on top of that because once you start adding whatever you see on, some kind of community pays like blind pays, for example, when people say I make $500,000 a year, those tend to have equity built in on top of it, which is hard to say exactly. So you're talking about straight up cash. I would say senior designers tend to make anywhere is 180 to 250K. If you go high on the equity because you're a risk taker, then you go a little lower on the salary side. So a lot of startups have this like weird dynamics. If you're a risk taker, I'll give you more equity, but low on cash. And people needs are very different. Especially if you're a family, you need a lot of cash, then you ask for a lot of cash and a low equity. So that's usually how sort of startups work. All right. So now that we have a minute left, yeah, I would just like to say thank you for everyone for being here. It was such a fun thing. And also thank you for being part of the ADPList. I am so impressed with the whole team all the time and then the community that it has built. So yeah, anytime, like, please, check us out and playbook.com. If you want to, give me some feedback on the product, that'd be great too. So awesome. Thank you so much for everyone being here. I wish everyone, luck. And then, of course, if you have any questions, LinkedIn or email me anytime. All right. See you guys. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a lovely evening. Bye. Or morning.